Hey everybody, I'm Rosalind, your friendly neighborhood landlord. Don't worry, I won't bite. Hey everybody, I'm Rosalind Resnick, the host of Your Friendly Neighborhood Landlord, the podcast where landlords and tenants talk about issues, break down barriers, and hopefully find some peace in this crazy world of ours. You'll learn how to find a landlord you can trust, how to save money on brokers' commissions, how to get your landlord's attention, and so much more. Welcome to the show. Today our topic is brokers' commissions, those fees that can cost a tenant anywhere from 1 month's rent to 15% of an entire year's lease. In most parts of the country, it's the landlord who pays, except in New York City. And we're talking thousands of dollars in a city where the vacancy rate is currently just a little over 1%. Last week, the New York City Council passed a law that would end the forced payment of brokers' commissions by New York City tenants and put the burden of payment on the landlord. But this victory for the tenants might ultimately backfire in the form of higher rent that landlords will now have to pass along. Here to discuss the issue is my friend Paolo Sciatta, an agent with Compass in New York, who handles both sales and rental listings. Paolo, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rosalind, for having me. Very excited to be on your podcast, and hi, everybody listening to it.
Thank you so much. And Paolo, here's the thing. I mean, you've been an agent for how long in New York? I know originally you came here from Italy, and that's great. I love Italy so much. But how long have you been an agent in New York City?
6 years. Before, actually, I used to live in Seattle, Washington,
Okay.
where I was working in tech. So this one is my second career.
Okay, so I could tell you, the fact that, you know what they say about New York, if you could make it there, you could make it anywhere. So the fact that you've been able to survive as an agent in New York City real estate for 6 solid years, that's quite an accomplishment.
It is. Usually there is a 2-year barrier.
Oh, is that right?
Past the first 2 years, yes.
And then everybody moves back to Seattle, right? I'm just kidding. But so long story short, so you've seen it from both angles, right?
Yes.
I mean, obviously you're an agent, but, I know that just for those listeners tuning in for the first time, for me personally, I'm a landlord. I own 6 historic townhouses in the West Village. And I've gotten calls from you. I think that's how we met, when you were looking for an apartment in the West Village for one of your clients.
Correct.
So the long story short is, what would you, I know New York is different because it's the tenant who has to pay. Now it's going to be the landlord, but you've seen both sides of the issue. So do you think that this new law that's been handed down by the city, and it's probably going to take effect, I guess, in 6 months, do you think this is going to reduce the cost of housing and really help the tenants find a more affordable apartment?
On the contrary, I believe, actually. So first of all, I'm a tenant as well. So I'm a renter.
Oh, okay.
A lot of my friends are renters. So I really live both sides of the story. I'll be affected the same way as anybody else is going to be affected by it. So as you mentioned, it's a double-edged sword, right? Yes, it's what looks a victory for tenants in New York. It may result as not really victory money-wise for them.
Right.
The first reaction is that probably landlords will reverse the cost they will back the cost into the rent. So we may see an increase of rent 8 to 10% higher right off the bat.
8 to 10%. Okay, but that's interesting though, because the episode that's the episode that's going to air next week, I talked to a broker named James Nelson about another law that the city just passed called good cause eviction.
Yeah,
which means that the landlord is constrained in most cases, even on free market apartments. The landlord cannot raise the tenant's rent more than 5% plus the CPI. So that means that the landlord wouldn't be able to be able to shift all the cost of that broker's commission onto the tenant.
I think there are limitations to it, but But yes, so I would say that New York is not doing much favors to landlords right now,
Right, right,
nor to brokers. But the on the landlords, especially since 2019, with the law on uh, rent stabilizing, rent stabilized apartments, it's they are really tied up on what they can do, and I think the city, instead of incentivize landlord to create more housing, they actually decreasing housing. Uh, but
right.
this is different
Unfortunately.
for a different episode.
Right,
Let's stay
which
on the
makes
fair
it
housing.
really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes it really tough for the tenant as well.
Correct, correct. So yes, the brokerage community. So first of all, yeah, there is like 6 months before this law gets into action, into play, and there might be further delays. The real estate board of New York may or may not sue uh, for this law, so there might be further delays. And I would say also, Rosalind, and tell me if you agree, I would say it benefits the renter only if they stay in one place for 1 year.
Right.
Because the moment they stay more than 1 year, they actually pay more over
Yes, of
time.
course. But I was going to say, Paolo, I just remember, I mean, I go back a long time in this business. I've been a landlord for 23 years now. And this was long before, I mean, obviously, the internet existed, but we didn't have platforms like StreetEasy, like websites where people could go and find out about all the apartments that were available just
Yeah.
by checking them out on their phone. I mean, because New York is still probably the only big city in the country without a multiple listing service. So I remember when I moved up from Florida to Brooklyn with my kids in 95, I had to go around with like five different brokers just to find a house because I didn't even know what was on the market. And it was the same thing with apartments. So I think back in the day, even though I always rail against brokers and commissions, but the fact is back in the day, brokers really did serve a purpose because if you were a tenant, you were new to the city, you didn't even know what was available. And, that broker would go around with you like all weekend, Saturday, Sunday, open houses, absolutely for free, right?
Yeah.
So that broker was like also like, that was just the broker, the buyer's broker who was taking you around as their client. But then also brokers who were the listing broker who represented the landlord. My recollection was that those brokers often had to they had to buy an ad in the New York Times, and so they had to advertise that listing, and it all came out of their pocket,
It's
right? So back then, I think they were doing a lot of heavy lifting. They were working hard. They were spending their own money on advertising. And, back then I would say that brokers probably did deserve to get a fee. But in today's world, right, anybody just goes onto their phone, like point click, there's Zillow, there's StreetEasy, there's all these different websites. And like, I'll just be the devil's advocate, right? I mean, you're an agent, tell me what you do to deserve that commission.
So to your point, it's become more difficult, right? So I think agents that do not, they cannot communicate the value proposition are gonna be out of business. First of all, on the rental side, obviously, on the listing agent, they still incurring fees. StreetEasy charges $6 to $10 a day to
Right.
advertise a listing, plus photography, floor planning. That can easily amount to $500 or more, depending on the service that he uses, plus the time, correct? On the tenant side, the tenant can still hire their own broker
Right.
if they find it useful, right? And I do find in some cases, actually, rental brokers are not that useful, depending on the cases, but in other cases, they are very useful. I would say for someone that is very new to New York, having a guidance to someone that knows in and out of the buildings or the area can be very, very, very useful. If you're a seasoned New Yorker and you know your way around, probably you don't need it. However, I can tell you that there are many, many scams still happening.
Okay, you're talking about Craigslist, places like that.
Correct. Facebook. I manage a Facebook group called Park Slope Housing. I believe we
Okay.
are like 10 or 15,000 members. And there is always someone trying to scam. So I do offer for the group like some pro bono services. So like if someone needs me to check, oh, is that landlord real? I can check if the landlord is real, or I
Okay.
can check on the lease if it's like actually a real lease or not. But there is a lot of tools that are actually available to tenant, and they can check actually the license. They should, if you go by yourself and you're looking for apartments on Craigslist or any other website that is not Street Easy and Zillow or Compass and so on, you always want to ask the broker or the agent their license number,
Okay.
cross-reference that on the license department of New
Okay,
York.
that's interesting. So what's the URL of that website?
Simply Google Department of Licensing New York Real
Okay.
Estate, and you can search people by name and by license.
Okay, that's a
It's
great
something
idea.
that I will definitely suggest everybody that is trying to rent by themselves.
Okay. Now let me ask, but what about, so that's like the tenant who's considering hiring an agent to take him around, but what about the listing broker? Like how do you know that the listing broker who's listed that apartment in Brooklyn or the East Village or wherever it is, how do you know if that person's legit? Because think about it, they're not working for you, they're working for the landlord.
Oh yeah, so I mean the leasing broker has a fiduciary duty towards the whoever hires him, which is in this case the landlord.
Okay.
So they will do anything possible to represent the landlord. But this goes also when someone trying to buy an apartment or an house.
Right.
The listing broker always represent the landlords and will do everything in landlord's benefit.
But having said that, I mean, doesn't like I know a little bit about like, broker and agency licensing. Because the agent is licensed by the state of New York, doesn't the broker, even if this broker agent is representing the landlord, he's the one who's showing and marketing the apartment, but doesn't he also have a fiduciary duty to protect the tenant
No,
who's looking at the apartment? No, he has
no,
no obligation at all.
no,
Absolutely zero.
zero obligation. Obviously, it has to be truthful. You cannot misrepresent
Okay.
information.
So I mean,
Obviously,
like if there was like if there's like a huge leak, or if I don't
if
know,
he
there
knows
was
about
some.
it, if the broker knows about the leak,
Okay.
he has to communicate it.
Okay, but if he doesn't know, it's not like he's obliged to do any kind of investigation.
No, that is up to the tenant,
So it's really buyer beware on the part of the tenant.
100%. So, what
Which,
is actually your point of view, being a landlord? What's your point of view on this
well, here's the
legislation?
thing. I mean, like 8 years ago, for a lot of reasons, 8 years, like I used to use brokers, right? I used to list my apartments in the West Village with brokers because they're very high end. And typically, back then, we're talking 8, 10 years ago, most of my tenants were high net families or individuals, and they would also come to see the apartment with a broker, right? So it was very much of a, like a broker to broker kind of transaction. And I guess because these tenants had a lot of money, nobody cared about paying a ridiculous fee, which was a month's rent back then. And now it's more like 15%. But what happened was 8, 10 years ago, the market started to change. So not only did websites like StreetEasy pop up with all these listings, but the tenants who started moving into my apartments, and this was even before COVID, I would say that, they were, one guy, a group of guys. I mean, they were all like young people in their 20s who were tech savvy. And now since COVID, I would say that my average tenant is a 25-year-old banker who's living with his friends. So the long story short is these are not the kind of people who are going to pay thousands of dollars to somebody who, in their opinion, is only standing there and opening the door. So that's why, and I used to own some multifamily buildings in Park Slope, as you know, that's when I discovered that if I wanted to do business with today's market and today's tenants, either I personally was going to have to pay the broker, which when you think about how much some of my apartments rent for, $10,000, $20,000, that just wasn't feasible. So I just decided to roll up my sleeves and start showing these apartments myself. So that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years. And it's been a win for me. It's been a win for my tenants because, I don't have to pay a broker's commission and neither do they. So they spend less, but I make more.
No,
Now,
100%.
having said that, I realize that not every landlord is going to be as ambitious as I am or, willing to like run up and down the stairs of a townhouse. But the reality is once this new law takes effect, essentially that's a choice that landlords are going to have to make unless they want to pay these really high broker commissions.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely options for the landlord, and there are options for the tenant as well,
Now,
right?
Paolo, so let me ask you about your apartment in Park Slope. Did
Yes,
you have to pay a fee when you rented that apartment?
it's a funny story. So
Okay.
I didn't pay the fee because the broker,
You're saying you did
I
not
did
pay a
not
fee.
pay the fee. It was 2020. I didn't pay the fee. It was advertised with fee, but
Okay.
I didn't pay because I tried to reach out the broker for like 3, 4 days,
Okay.
and I never heard back. So I reached out to the landlord
Oh, great.
and say, "Hey, I'm trying to get in, but nobody gets back to me. And
Right.
what can we do?" So he had the super let me in, and I rented the apartment.
Okay, so Paolo, so I mean, you actually, I guess, like, even though you're an agent, but I feel like you're confirming my theory, which is that it's much better for landlords and tenants to do business directly. It's a
So
win for everybody.
I was already an agent, so I was experienced. I knew what to look for,
Right.
right? So it was now my first rodeo in that sense. And as a matter of fact, I was able to find the lender information. Some lenders don't want to deal with tenants directly. So
Right.
it's
That's
also to think
true.
about that, right? But
Okay.
I was ready to pay commission. I mean, if that was the only way to get in, it was not advertised as no fee. So I was fully aware that I was going to pay commission, but I was also ready to negotiate commission.
Right. Exactly.
Definitely
Exactly.
I was not going to pay 15% for
Right. Of course not. Because it's like we say in New York, right? It's like I lived in the city for so many years. Now I'm down here in the DC area to be closer to my daughter. But I mean, this is what we say in New York, that maybe I was born yesterday, but I wasn't born last night. So you've become a true New Yorker.
No,
So
yeah,
Pallavi,
and
before we wrap up, do you have any other advice for tenants who are looking for apartments, for landlords who are now going to need to pay this fee? Like, what would you suggest that they do?
I always recommend to look at your options and make sure that you make the right decision. If you're looking to rent in a co-op or a condo, or it's always good to have a rental broker with you that can help you navigate, especially the co-op board and the application. If you are looking of internet beside like Craigslist or Facebook group, make sure that the person you're talking to, if he's qualified as a rental agent, he
Right.
is licensed, and actually try also to call the office to make sure that the person is licensed in that office. And for landlords, really comes down to service. It's not gonna be an agent that is just gonna open the door, but it's gonna
Right.
be an agent that is gonna be able to provide insight on the market, proper represent him, and market the apartment properly, depending on the apartment.
Okay, so Paula, we need to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. And thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to Your Friendly Neighborhood Landlord. I'm Rosalind Resnick. I'll see you next Monday with a brand new episode. I'd like to thank Brian Miller, my talented and intrepid producer, for welcoming me to the world of podcasting and working diligently behind the scenes to make sure that each episode is as acoustically perfect as possible. To keep listening to more of these informative podcasts, and to learn how to save money on your apartment, click follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have a question, feel free to shoot me an email at rosalindyc@gmail.com. So that's Rosalind, ROSALIND, NYC, like New York City, @gmail.com. See you next week. Bye.